Welcome and thank you for joining us from your homes around the world for the second in a series of webinars hosted by Rocky Mountain Institute on the 7 challenges for energy transformation and the work that we and a broad network of partners around the world are driving to address these challenges head on. I'm Kelly Vaughn, Marketing Director for Rocky Mountain Institute, and I just want to start by sincerely hoping that you and your families and your colleagues are all staying safe and healthy during these challenging times. We acknowledge that tomorrow is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. So this Earth Day event is brought to you by Rocky Mountain Institute Solutions Council and Innovator Circle. These are 2 groups that many of them are joining us today, and we want to acknowledge their important role in making RMI's work possible through their support. Earth Day offers us a reminder of the importance of protecting our planet and all life it supports. And amid the COVID-19 pandemic, it reinforces the importance of maintaining our mission to drive a clean, prosperous, and secure low-carbon future. Today, as we're discussing Challenge 2 in our 7 Challenges series, this is tripling energy productivity gains. So particularly today, we'll hear about the Global Cooling Prize and how this is revolutionizing energy productivity of air conditioning and proving that industry and the capital markets that fund them can accelerate energy transformation at a much faster pace through investment and innovation. Our host today is Ian Campbell, who is an RMI Senior Fellow who will introduce our guest shortly. But first, for some housekeeping. We'll have 30 minutes of presentation, after which we'll do 15 minutes of Q&A. You can submit your questions anytime during the conversation by simply entering them into the comments section of your dashboard. And then we'll address as many as we can during the Q&A portion of our agenda, which I'll be posing to all of our panelists. And a recording will be available shortly after this presentation today, which we will distribute to all of you shortly. So right now, I'm going to hand it off to Ian Campbell. Let me just make him our presenter here, and he will take it away.
That's terrific. Thank you, Kelly, and good morning, and thank you to everyone for joining us here today. Let me start off by just introducing our guests that are joining us here. We're delighted to be able to introduce Rasha Hassanein, who's Vice President of Product Management Excellence and Innovation at Trane Technologies, and also Bruce Hoops, who's Vice President of Engineering Strategy and Innovation at Carrier. And together they represent 2 of the most well-respected global corporations in the cooling industry and are going to be joining us with discussion in about 10 to 15 minutes time. What I did want to start with, though, was to really take everyone through what the Global Cooling Prize is, what the objectives are of the prize, and where we are as a backdrop for the discussion that we're going to have with Rasha and with Bruce. So where we're going to start is the cooling dilemma of what is the cooling dilemma, and the cooling dilemma is that it's increasingly access to cooling is increasingly seen as a societal and even a developmental need, but it comes at an environmental cost that we cannot afford. And so it's a dilemma that we have to solve. And when you look at cooling, when you look in the rearview mirror, it probably hasn't captured so much attention outside of things like the Montreal Protocol and the recent Kigali amendment to the Montreal Protocol. But what this chart shows is kind of a glimpse into the future in relation to the unmet demand for cooling around the world. So the bars on this chart represent the normalized demand, which is basically cooling degree days factored by population. And then the line chart shows the penetration of cooling in these different countries and regions around the world. So as an example, here in the United States, we're about 90% penetration of cooling, but you can see in relation to the combination of cooling degree days and population, a really modest level of demand. And then you look to the right of where there hasn't been that penetration, And you see that there's going to be significant growth within this, within the space of cooling, which if you're in the industry is an exciting proposition, but we're going to come to what some of the challenges are associated with that. But it's not just about today's unmet demand. It's also, there's some major accelerators at work. So population growth, but also urbanization, which is where we're seeing population concentration. And in dense urban environments, it's very hard to find natural cooling or to deploy passive cooling approaches. And then we also have rising income growth, which increases population's ability to gain access to cooling. And all of that is happening in the context of a warming planet. And what we're seeing is that for many people, comfort cooling is really transitioning from, I think in more temperate climates, something that we would perhaps perceive as a luxury, to being an enabler of health, human well-being, productivity, and prosperity. And where we see that most is obviously within the tropical zone of the world, which is where about 40% of the world's population resides. If you translate that to, okay, so we see that demand and increasing ability for that demand to be met. What do we think is going to happen in relation to the growth of cooling equipment? Well, the largest and fastest growing sector is the residential or room air conditioning sector. And today we have about 1.3 billion units in operation around the world. By 2050, that's expected to go to about 4.5 billion units. And then we start to get to where some of those challenges start to show themselves, which is that just in that residential room air conditioning sector, the electricity consumption, assuming continued business as usual improvement in efficiency, would actually be equivalent, just for residential room air conditioners, would be equivalent to all of the electricity consumption for all end uses in the US, Germany, and Japan combined today. Why is that particularly challenging? Well, it's also that cooling, unlike other loads, drives the peak load on the grid. So therefore, it's directly correlated to the amount of grid capacity that is needed to be able to satisfy the loads, which in turn makes it a very expensive load for utilities to serve. There's also a considerable burden in relation to the cost of operating this equipment for the consumers that procure it, where typically the energy costs of operation over the 10-12 year life of the piece of equipment will be 3 to 4 times what the cost was to purchase and install that piece of equipment at the start of its life. What does that mean from an emissions perspective? Well, for cooling, as I'm sure many of you know, there's actually 2 categories of emissions. We have direct emissions associated with refrigerant release through unit's life and also end of life, and also the indirect emissions associated with the electricity consumption that is used to power the units. And today for this sector, it's about 2 gigatons of emissions a year. And you look at the business as usual growth, that goes to about 5.5 gigatons a year by 2050. And that's assuming that there's continued business as usual improvement in the quality of the buildings that we build and their efficiency, continued improvement in equipment standards and equipment efficiency, and also continued adoption of more renewable energy on the grid. So that gets us to the environmental cost that we can't afford in relation to satisfying the demands for access to cooling. There's efforts that have been underway that actually are very significant, but by themselves are not sufficient. One would be the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, which back in 2016, 197 countries came together and agreed a phase down schedule for the most highly potent HFC refrigerants, which goes all the way through to 2048. And that is still in the process of being ratified. But what that would do with a successful implementation, it would take that 2050 GHG impact or CO2 equivalent impact of 5.5 gigatons and pull that down to about 3.5 gigatons per year. But that's the impact on direct emissions and effectively provides a pathway. But then we look at indirect emissions. And for the indirect emissions, yes, we're building better buildings and we're being smarter about how we operate them. And we absolutely need to continue to do that. But we also have to address the energy consumption of the equipment that's serving the cooling loads. And when you look at the market, especially in this sector, the residential room air conditioning sector, where you know, often the buyers are first-time buyers and not so familiar with the technology that they're buying. What the market has demanded is more affordable cooling products, and industry has done an amazing job to innovate and provide the market more affordable cooling products. But the market has not demanded more efficient or more sustainable products, and the policy signals in this space are generally weak. And so when you look at the performance of the technologies out there today, and you look at the maximum theoretical efficiency of the cycle that is operated for air conditioning, there's significant potentially there's very significant opportunity for improvement, but the signals that drive that improvement aren't there in the market today. So that really took us to, okay, how do we shine a spotlight on this space, and is a prize something that could catalyze innovation? And there's a saying with prizes that, you know, when you're looking for next generation technology, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Well, with the prize, the needles come to find you. At least that's what you hope happens. So we set prize criteria of what we were looking for, and that was a technology that would have 1/5 of the lifetime climate impact as compared to the most popular unit that was being sold in the market in India today. We picked India because it is the potentially the when you look at the unmet demand profile, it would be the largest market by a huge factor around the world over the next 30 years. And also within the realms of affordability from a first cost perspective, and then other criteria to ensure no unintended consequences. And the prize was launched back in November 2018. It was launched with considerable support from our initiating partners, which was the Department of Science and Technology, the Government of India, and also Mission Innovation, an initiative of the Clean Energy Ministerial, sponsored by some absolutely amazing funders who we're very grateful to, and then a network of outreach partners that helped us communicate the word about the prize and helped us with the messaging about the prize to communities around the world. So before we go on to talk about where we are, just a little bit about, so what would happen if, as per the criteria that we set for the prize, that the world was able to transition to technologies that had 1/5 of the life cycle climate impact. Well, if we go back to that gigatons per annum in 2050, business as usual, 5.5 gigatons, successful implementation of the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, 3.5 gigatons, it would actually take the emissions associated with the sector down to just below 1 gigaton. which is less than it is today, which means that if we achieve that, then we now have an environmental cost that we can afford, because that resultant or remaining 1 gigaton of emissions can be addressed with accelerated renewable transition within the grids to effectively offset that. What that means is looking between now and 2050 would be about 75 gigatons of cumulative emissions reduction, about 2,000 gigawatts of avoided new generation capacity globally, which is about 1.4 trillion of redundant investment that can be avoided, and extending that business as usual scenario out to 2100 would actually impact by just under half a degree of global warming. So where are we on this journey? Well, we did achieve very significant tier 1 media coverage of the prize, and secured over 2.5 billion impressions. We've had users to our site from 197 countries around the world. We had initially over 2,000 registered applicants for the prize, and there was a number of stage gates that applicants went through, and there was 139 that provided detailed technical applications with engineering calculations, energy simulations, and design schematics from 31 different countries around the world. Of those, in November of 2019, we selected 8 as finalists. We were particularly excited about the diversity of the finalists from a number of dimensions, diversity of technology, and there's things here like solid state cooling, there's advanced dehumidification technologies and hybrid solutions with today's traditional vapor compression technology. Came from different regions of the world, from China, from India, from the US, from Japan, from Europe, and also diversity of entity profile. There's 2 of the finalists that in this sector are amongst the largest of the manufacturers, to a new startup and a spin out from a university lab. So really excited about the diversity of the finalists. They're all currently working on prototype development, but with the current environment we're in, that's obviously slowed. And we have updated the timeline for the prize. So we're now looking at delivery of prototypes at the end of August, to actually then start to go through the testing phase of the prize. And then we're looking at a final award event in March of 2021. Obviously, that timeline is still subject to change because there's obviously requirements for people to be able to access their labs, their workshops, their fabrication facilities, and also to be able to support installation at the test facilities in India. So we're managing our way through that right now. So the next step on the prize is the testing. Actually going to have 3 different testing protocols. Lab simulated tests, which is actually simulates full-year operating environment. A field test in an apartment block that we have secured just outside of Delhi in India, where each of the units will be working concurrently, and then a rating system test under the Indian standard. But I think that kind of leads us to the discussion that we wanted to have with Rasha and with Bruce here is, innovation is critical, but alone it's not enough. With the prize, what we're looking to do is to demonstrate what's possible. And there's a lot of people that focus on minimum energy performance standards and the floor of performance, and we want to try and show people how high the ceiling is. And we need to extract learnings from this process to inform future policy. We're also working with the Indian government in relation to how to stimulate scaling of some of the technologies that are uncovered through the prize, through different procurement mechanisms. But one of the perhaps the most important thing that we've looked to do is to establish an investor marketplace to connect those that are able to commercialize and invest with consenting innovators looking for investment and support. Because with the ecosystem of innovators within this space that has been kind of identified under the spotlight, we've seen some pretty amazing concepts and ideas, and connecting those with some of the industry players that are at the forefront in relation to innovation and sustainability was really important. So Rasha obviously is representing Trane Technologies here, and Bruce is representing Carrier Corporation. And again, delighted to have them join us. And I thought now would be the time to start having that discussion about the role of innovation and industry in relation to energy productivity, next generation technologies, and clean energy transition. So I think to get us started, and Rasha, I'd like to, if I can, start with you. Maybe I could ask you just to briefly share your thoughts on the importance of innovation, and maybe talk a little bit about what you see as the drivers for innovation, and also the enablers for resource allocation within Trane Technologies.
Sure, Ian, and thank you. Thanks to all of you for having me here. It really is a pleasure to be here, and it's been a fantastic partnership with the Rocky Mountain Institute throughout this process. I remember sitting in out in RMI talking through this with you, like almost a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And I was pretty new to Trane Technologies and was really excited about the outcomes, and so we're really excited to be here. For those on the call who don't know, Trane Technologies is really only about 7 weeks old as a company. We were originally part of, we originally sort of Ingersoll Rand, and the company sort of split, and the industrial companies all sort of went over and became the new sort of Ingersoll Rand, and where we are now is a very tightly focused climate company that has at the core of its purpose sustainability and innovation. And so for us, that's really at the core of what we do every day. And so obviously working with you guys has been really essential to our core purpose. But this new company is really all about challenging what's possible. It's also deeply rooted in sustainability. So when we think about the drivers for innovation at Trane Technologies, it's really around innovating to drive value for our customers and ensure that we hit our very, I would say, ambitious climate commitments. And so it's easy to do one at the expense of the other. What's hard is to bring those together and continue to challenge yourself to develop solutions that can do both. And so that is really what we focus on. And those are really our drivers for innovation. And so when you say really what are the drivers for innovation for you guys as a company, it's really that, right? I look after innovation for the company. We have some incubation funds, and when we look at what do we really want to focus on investing in, it's those really cool ideas that bring together unprecedented value for our customers while really moving the needle on shifting the industry.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. Thank you, Rasha. Bruce, maybe you can introduce a little bit about Carrier, which I guess in a similar way has only recently formed as an independent entity out of United Technologies. But let me hand over to you to perhaps share a little about that and a little bit about innovation and how you're thinking about that at Carrier.
Yes, thank you, Ann. And let me also say thanks for the invitation to participate here. We're also, at Carrier really excited about the engagement here with the community and looking forward to doing great things together. So you're right. Recently, at a very interesting time, given what's going on globally, we're also in the midst of a spinoff to a standalone company, which I think will, allow us to have a singular focus and really a focus on what is most important to our customers as well. And we have a very strong history of innovation at Carrier, and our priorities are really around addressing those things you talked about before as megatrends: urbanization, food needs of the growing global population, and of course, climate change. Our founder basically invented vapor compression-based cooling, but we need to continue, pushing Carrier as a disruptive leader in this industry. And I think one that can really, help solve that cooling dilemma, and you talked about earlier. So obviously, innovation is key to our success and to solving those kind of problems. And I think, in addition to our focus on R&D investment and getting products out the door, our innovation organization is really key to this, I'd say, more future focused and, very nicely aligned with the strategic themes of the company in the growth strategy around sustainability, around service, around digital solutions, and expanding, our current markets, but really thinking about, growth not only in those markets, but adjacent ones as well. And I think, when we sort of think about enablers for how do we allocate resources, it all ties together here. I mean, we are directing our resources towards growth opportunities. I think, especially in innovation, with recognizing that it's the mega trends like climate change that are really going to be the long-term drivers of those opportunities. And that longer-term focus is one reason why we've, strengthened our innovation organization. And honestly, I think it's why, we're much more focused and intent now to become engaged with initiatives like this one that can help us, understand the challenges, but connect globally with the ecosystem that will help us all selectively meet those challenges.
Yeah, no, that's great, Bruce. So, Bruce, I'll maybe stay with you for this next question and jump back to Rasha. I think that, I kind of reflect back on when I was in, working on the other side with a large corporation in this industry. And one of the things we kind of struggled with was, innovation. You have the projects that you undertake internal to your organization, but so much of the innovation is kind of how can you partner, collaborate? Where do you see early stage innovation happening within the market? How do you track that? And how can you take some of those things that can be a fit in relation to your goals and take them forward? And it was always, I found a challenge to really track that early stage innovation that's happening outside of your own company. And just would appreciate any thoughts from you about how you think about that, and and mechanisms that you may be looking at. And I know that you're both competitors here, so you don't have to go through in the detail, but just in concept of some of the approaches that that you consider or look at to be able to track early stage innovation within the sectors that you're most interested in.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and sort of key is I'll call it the operating model that we have in place for our innovation organization. It really helps frame up our approach here, because it's a combination of sort of what you talked about, which is I'd say the more traditional sort of internal incubation, but coupled very tightly with an external venture engagement arm. and key to that venture model is to make sure that we have those mechanisms to continuously engage with that broad ecosystem. That makes sure we're aware of and participating in all that early stage activity, from the wide range of players that are out there, whether that's startups, universities, innovation hubs, thought leaders, whatever it may be. And I actually think the cooling price is a great example of that. I mean, it's a way to connect with that ecosystem. I think, sort of one of the other challenges here is that this stuff happens everywhere. So I think having an approach that is global is key. And, we have a network of our own innovation hubs in India, in Shanghai, and Singapore, here in the US and Europe, that for us is a very important means to connect with all that stuff that's happening, locally, regionally around the world, and sort of backed up by our expansive engineering footprint. So I think that's sort of one key thing, is to, think globally, but have those connections and ties on a local and regional basis as well. Probably another key point here is to, we're very tightly connected with our business development team, because even though this, I talk about this from an engineering perspective, it's really a corporate initiative, and that helps us, connect with all of the different sort of opportunities that come through that business development arm as well. So I think, there's a lot of other mechanisms I could talk about, but I think probably the main point is to really effectively engage and cover that range of activity. You need to have a lot of different mechanisms. You need to be thinking about this again, sort of on a global basis, but acting on a very sort of regional and local basis, so we can be agile and make those connections.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I like that that global local kind of focus on both global reach but local in relation to relationships and partnering. Rasha, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. And I know this is something that you do. I'm sure you have mechanisms and processes that have been in place for a while, because it was I think you reached out to us at RMI over a year and a half ago when you heard what we were doing, to find out how you could be engaged and involved within that. So I know that this is something you've been on thinking on and developing for quite some time. And great to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would say, similar to what Bruce talked about, we also have a global network of innovation centers across the world that we leverage. I'll tell those who know me know I do stories well. I have a really good friend who is a consultant, and as consultants do, they tend to have really good analogies. And she used to say to me, innovation is like a glacier, where all the big companies are kind of almost frozen in the middle, where there's a little bit of activity, but all of the growth of the glacier happens on the edges as that glacier freezes very rapidly and grows. And the best companies in the middle are those who know how to embrace those that are growing on the edge. And so that's kind of how we look at innovation internally, which is, really around the company, we are sensing all different kinds of innovation. So we look at innovation in terms of both market-led innovation and technology-led innovation. And we have mechanisms in all of our businesses, whether it's through product management, which is sort of the other part of my role, or through engineering. Product management, really looking at what are the big sort of problems to solve for the market and for our customers, and engineering looking at what are really the new and novel advances in technology that we can bring together. And either of those mechanisms can work for us. So through our pretty large network within our businesses of product managers and engineers, we kind of bring all of those ideas back into the center and start to understand what is out there and what are the big problems we want to go solve as a company, as it relates to both our customers and around sustainability. We have networks of excellence globally. we have sort of our innovation function, but we also have, and as you know, Ian, from your sort of relationship, we also have our Center for Energy Efficiency and Sustainability. And what that team does for us is they help us stay connected to NGOs and other sustainability focused organizations who also have visibility into those environments, because really the key is understanding what's out there, but also understanding what can be applicable within our core purpose. And with our core purpose being focused on sustainability, having connectivity into RMI and others that that are really focused in that area really helps us, as you know. And so those would be really, in addition to kind of what Bruce has been talking about, those would be really our main mechanisms. And I concur, sort of, it's everywhere. It's global, it's local, it's small companies, it's big companies. And we're really trying to understand the best ways to partner both with smaller companies where investment is needed, or even with bigger companies who share our purposes and can help us go to market together, right? And that becomes really, those become really interesting partnerships, especially if those companies are based in other application spaces, right? So really cool stuff that works other places. How can that add value and help us innovate within the HVAC and refrigeration industry?
Yeah, no, it's interesting as well with the, by the way, I love the glacier example, but analogy.
I can take no credit for it.
Well, your consultant friend should.
Yes.
But within the prize, it's interesting how many technologies that we've seen that were submitted from folks that are from outside the industry.
Right.
So different industries that have come up with a technology or an innovation that has potential to cross over and impact and potentially provide opportunities within the cooling or air conditioning industry and space. So Rasha, put you on the spot here a little bit, and then we'll go back to Bruce. You know, be great if you could just share some of your thoughts about the investor marketplace that we established as part of the prize. You know, for you to have that opportunity to connect with consenting participants, and it's important that, you know, the people that participate choose whether they want to be connected. And, you know, have you done something like this before, and how valuable or not valuable do you think? And I know we're still in the early stages of that. It'd be good to get your thoughts as to how you think that's shaping up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, what I love about the Global Cooling Prize is that it's what I would call a mobilizing event, right? It's an event that draws innovators and mobilizes them to go solve a big problem. And when you have a really focused big problem to solve, which is kind of where our focus is, you can really draw out, like you said, innovators from across multiple industries to solve a problem that's really relevant to us. And that, to me, is the primary benefit of working with you guys on this, is really identifying those inventors through the marketplace, identifying which have the best kind of fit for us, and sort of working with them very collaboratively to bring solutions to market for our customers. At the end of the day, the goal is to really help our customers innovate their businesses, innovate in their businesses, and do that very sustainably. And that becomes really that marketplace, and the access and the ability to really connect with those companies is the core benefit for us out of sort of the Cooling Prize when you get right down to it. And we feel that we bring really that ability to partner and scale and go to market in a way that's sort of a win-win for both the company that we're working with, right, the startup or the innovators that we're working with, and for us and for our customers ultimately. And so that to me becomes really great. I think the process has been fantastic so far. It's still, like you said, early days, but everything is all of them. The contestants seem to be super super engaged, and the ideas are all super interesting. So so I'm looking forward to the outcome. I can't really comment on the outcome yet because it's still early days, but it's looking good. I got to tell you. But I got to say, I mean, in general, it's been a fantastic experience, and I think this will be we'll have some really interesting outcomes from it.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Rasha. It's very kind. And actually, one of the things that we've been very excited about, and I personally have been very excited about, is, you know, we set the criteria for the prize, which was really to solve for, you know, much more efficient, low or no GWP refrigerant, and a cooling device for an apartment in a dense urban environment. And we've had people come to us with all sorts of cooling technologies because they just wanted someone to listen to them. And so we've accumulated insights into technologies that really cannot apply to that particular end use, but are nevertheless absolutely fascinating and have potential in other sectors. So we're excited about those as well.
Exactly. Exactly.
Bruce, this may be, I think, our last question before we go to the audience for a Q&A, and then see if we have an opportunity to come back a little later. But maybe you can just share a little bit about your decision to participate on the investment committee of the prize, and what you've learned so far from the engagement.
Yeah, I think you know, obviously this focus on sustainability and innovation, you know, it's part of our DNA, and engagement here to me was a, you know, let's say easy way to exercise that commitment and really drive forward. I mean, we're able to establish relationships with startups and others, you know, are also committed to solving this problem that frankly would have been probably difficult to find without a mechanism like this. You know, I think Rasha was right on. I mean, the investor marketplace, it brings benefits both to the participants and to the committee members. I mean, it really helps the participants break down those barriers to get their ideas, you know, to the surface, and, you know, access to capital and the other kind of obstacles they would face. But it gives us, you know, access to such a broad range of technologies. And you mentioned, I mean, even broader than sort of specifically the prize was targeted to. I think the other sort of point, and I mean, we sort of realized this, you know, as we got engaged, was it the kind of operational efficiency it brings in innovation to be able to, you know, find those ideas, vet those ideas, scale up, you know, just see the amount of activity here is something that's very, very important. I mean, we internally would not be able to stretch that far across multiple kinds of initiatives like this. So that's really powerful. I mean, it reminds me in a way of, you know, some of the innovation challenges that we've run externally through external innovation hubs, in terms of a mechanism, but, you know, it takes a lot of effort to do that. And those don't have, I think, nearly the reach as we've seen from the Global Cooling Prize. So I think it's been a great engagement, and looking forward to going forward on it.
That's terrific. Thank you, Bruce, and thank you both for joining us and sharing your insights. And please stay on the line, because we are going to open up to Q&A with the group. But before we do that, just wanted to also thank both of you and your teams, because you've just done an amazing job kind of supporting the applicants and even supporting a number of the finalists in relation to just mundane things like how do they access the supply chain to be able to get the components to build their prototypes, and getting them connected with folks that can help them. And you've just been terrific organizations to work with. So let me, on that note, hand over to back to Kelly, who's going to moderate any questions that come in from the audience, and then depending on how the questions go, there's a lot of other topics I'd love to continue to discuss with both Rasha and Bruce here. So Kelly, over to you.
Wonderful, and thanks to everyone attending today for the great questions that are coming in. Just a reminder, you can submit your questions by chatting them into your dashboard. The first few questions have come in related to the technologies that are surfacing as from the finalists of the Global Cooling Prize. The first is, do any of the 8 finalists represent previously unrecognizable technologies or approaches to cooling, or are they more like refinements of existing technologies? And then to build on that, another question came in around out of the selected teams, how much is public about these finalist submissions, and at what point can we expect to learn more?
Okay, great questions, and I think I probably have to answer those ones. So the first one in relation to the technologies, I think the answer is kind of yes and yes. Probably the two that stand the two that stand out the most as from a novel or new technology perspective. One would be Baracal, which was the spin out from the University of Cambridge. This is a solid state material that's being used as a refrigerant. So is a material that when it's subject to relatively modest pressure has huge heat gain, and when that pressure is released is when it provides significant amounts of cooling. And so that's getting away from vapor compression cooling and actually looking at a solid state cooling, and it's a completely inert material which has zero impact in the atmosphere. So one of the things that we obviously see is that those that are in the finalists that are very new and novel are probably higher risk than those that are derivatives of today's technology. But we're fortunate that we're in a position to be able to see these technologies perform and see, the features of them that I think we collectively view as having the greatest potential, and see that demonstrated. There's another one, which is a chemical company, I would call out Kraton Corporation, who developed a material for wicking moisture for sports clothing, and it never kind of took off within that space. And when they saw the prize, they looked at that as, okay, well, we think this can handle the dehumidification cycle super efficiently, and would allow for an evaporative cooling technology to provide the actual temperature control. And so a technology that kind of brings something in from another industry. And then we've got ones that are hybrids of today's technology, but with some absolutely ingenious features or elements or controls associated with them. There are summaries of, if you go into our website, globalcoolingprize.org, you'll see the picture of the logo of each of the finalists. If you click on that, it will provide you a description of their technology. But yes, we're very excited that we have a combination of hybrid approaches and very novel and new technologies. Outside of the finalists, we actually saw a lot of novel and new technologies, many of which I would say were too early stage to be able to progress. But there's a lot of very encouraging activity happening within this space. So hopefully that answers the two questions. Actually, before I hand back, Kelly, Rasha and Bruce, I know that you have seen a little bit about the finalist technologies and profiles, and anything that you would add to my comments, please feel free.
I think, one thing I'd say, sorry, go ahead, Rasha.
No, go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of make a broader point here, which is, it's nice to see the diversity. And I think in innovation in general, that's sort of something we see a lot. And one thing about innovation is sometimes people think about it as it needs to be deep technology invention. And the reality is a lot of innovation comes from putting together, things that already exist in new and novel ways.
Yeah.
So that's encouraging, and that's what helps us move fast a lot of ways. I think even in this, sort of context of the pandemic, we've been able to take pieces of technology off the shelf and put them together and release products, within sort of weeks time frame. And that's a very powerful way to think about innovation also.
Yeah, I agree. Rash?
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that if someone asked me, kind of 9 months ago, what would be my thing I'm most concerned about in relation to the prize, it would be like, well, what if everyone comes up with the same idea? How do we select who to take forward as a finalist, and how do we select who to win? Which is why the diversity of the technologies that we're seeing is so encouraging. Kelly, hand back to you.
Great. The next few questions are around adoption of these new technologies. And one is about, is there a cost savings at the end of the day for consumers? What do you feel is the key to unlocking broader market adoption of these innovations? And then there's a few specific questions around particular mechanisms that might be interesting. Are we looking at banks providing securitization for these new technologies, or can providers offer a PPA-like lease model to help owners afford a higher upfront cost? Talk a little bit about what some of the main factors are to drive market adoption and how that plays into not only the prize design, but also Bruce and Rasha, for you both in the industry and what you think about.
Okay, so let me maybe kick off with just a little bit about the prize criteria. So I mentioned that, the technology that or the criteria for the prize was to have 1/5 of the climate impact. And basically, to be able to have that reduction in climate impact, most of that is on the energy efficiency side. It's about 4/5 of it on the energy efficiency side, and that the affordability criteria is that an assessed kind of entry-level industrial scale can't be more than twice the first cost. So what does that actually mean? Well, if we have a winning technology that meets that 1/5 climate impact criteria, that would mean that it would use at least 1/4 of the annual electricity consumption. And if it costs twice as much as a first cost, its life cycle cost would be about half that of traditional technology sold in the market today. So that level of efficiency would effectively pay back. You'd have a simple payback of around 3-4 years that it would pay back. And so that gets to the question of market adoption, because you've still then got an issue of, okay, we still have, this high efficiency equipment, and it has a high first cost, and the consumers are very sensitized to first cost, and they're not really as sensitized to life cycle cost. And so the two main mechanisms to overcome or help overcome that, one is obviously policy, when there's an understanding of what's possible in relation to efficiency. There can be more rapid scaling of minimum energy performance standards that effectively help protect consumers from buying inefficient, high energy consuming equipment, and also help protect stability on the grid because of the impact of the equipment through peak loads. But you're also looking at financing mechanisms that can defray a portion of that upfront cost. What I can say is on the financing mechanisms that we have been having discussions with the World Bank and an organization under the Ministry of Power in India called ESSOL, Energy Efficiency Services Limited, which is a super ESCO in India, to run pilot programs that would enable the adoption of high efficiency equipment with a pay-as-you-save model for repayment of that deferred capital cost. So Some of these things are things that will come in the future, but it's important that these signals are there for industry, because and I know that Rasha and Bruce, I'm sure, would comment, industry needs to see that there's going to be signals of demand for more sustainable, high efficient equipment. Otherwise, they're going to be limited in their ability to invest in that. So these signals that show that there is going to be future demand, there are going to be the policy signals, there are going to be the mechanisms that can enable uptake of the equipment, are absolutely critical. And Rasha or Bruce, please feel free to add thoughts to that, because those questions are kind of the crux of the transition from a technology demonstration to an environment that enables scaling of high efficiency and sustainable equipment to occur.
Yeah, Ian, I think you kind of you hit the nail on the head there, in terms of that balance. What I would say is actually, for us, this is a long play, right? And so, what we're trying to do is uncover innovation that is going to really transform how the industry moves. And one of the things I love about the Global Cooling Prize, it is based in India, and it is about the sort of room air conditioning, the residential heating cooling market there. But when you think about it as a long play, once you have these early stage financing mechanisms in place, which, by the way, some of us can also support, right? There's nothing that says that a vendor can't have a financing mechanism. We have those. What happens is, especially with these novel technologies, is eventually that cost curve will go down, and you'll start to get into an affordability conversation that is much more palatable. In addition, you do have segments of the market today that would be willing to pay more for the higher efficiency model, because of the demographics and the consumer behavior, right? So you have, air conditioning in a lot of these emerging markets becomes a status symbol. And to the extent that that status symbol is something that somebody can afford, you're going to have segments of the market who are going to be coming into the middle class that can afford and will pay for that as early adopters as the technology goes down the cost curve. So I actually love the fact that the Cooling Prize is looking at that payback and looking at first cost as an important lever in the process. But at the same time, for us, this is really, really a long play. And to the extent that we can uncover innovations that can then be applied, again, in my opinion, across not just emerging residential markets, but developed residential markets, commercial markets, or even refrigerated transport, that will enable that technology to go down that cost curve even faster. And so for us, scaling actually becomes a mechanism to hitting first cost in the long term. But to your point, Ian, right, getting over that initial hump is always, the most critical piece with innovation, and that becomes, the work you guys are doing there is fantastic. And to the extent that we get through the prize and we identify some of these technologies, we would be willing to do some of that work too, because for us, this is something that we believe is really a long-term play for the industry.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. Bruce, anything you would like to add before I hand back to Kelly?
Yeah, just quickly, I think all great points. I mean, the other sort of thought here is that the kind of services-based economy we all live in these days, I think really will help with this as we go forward. Ideas like cooling as a service, which maybe 10 or 20 years ago were sort of hard to wrap your head around. Now I think people are much more in a mode of thinking about those kind of offerings. So I think that's going to be a nice mechanism to sort of underpin where we need to go in this area as well.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. Kelly, I think we're pretty much at time here.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you everyone for these insightful questions. And of course, there were many great questions that were submitted that we weren't able to get to, but we will look to follow up with each of you with a recording and to follow up with some of the unanswered questions in a subsequent blog post. So we definitely appreciate everyone's time and attention today, and we hope that you are both informed and inspired about the innovations shared that address Challenge 2 in the 7 challenges for energy transformation and get us closer to a clean, prosperous, and secure low-carbon future. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Thank you all for joining us today. We do have several other programs at Rocky Mountain Institute that are really focused on driving innovation and disruption in clean tech, both in surfacing new innovations and in financing innovations. So we will follow up and send you more information on those types of programs, and we encourage you to learn more. And again, as a nonprofit organization, RMI is so grateful to all of our donors and supporters who make this work possible. Thank you to all of our partners on the Global Cooling Prize for joining today. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a wonderful 50th anniversary Earth Day tomorrow, and please stay safe. Thank you very much.